What's up, guys? Man, I've been really struggling to catch a break this year. Between getting sick for a few weeks that had me just total head clog, vertigo, the whole nine, not safe to fly, and then weather, I just haven't had a chance to get out to fly and make a video for you guys. And even today, we got, kind of low clouds. There's mountain obscurations all around, low visibility. So I was able to pop away from the airport to land up here. But I wanted to use today as a good chance to follow up on the Rotax 915. For you guys that have been following, I installed that a little over a year ago, but now that I've had a chance to fly it through all 4 seasons, really put it through its paces, got 150 some odd hours on it, I figured now's a good time, follow up and see, is that thing still a beast?
I'm Trent Palmer. I fly drones for a living and bush planes for fun. Follow along as I journey off the beaten path of aviation.
So, for those who are not in the know and don't know what I'm talking about with the engine and prop combo I have, I did do a build series a little over a year ago called the Cub Killer, or Operation Cub Killer, where we pulled off the old Rotax 912 that was on my plane, switched it out for a 915, whole new firewall forward, all new avionics prop, the whole 9. If you haven't watched that series, go watch it. It's a pretty good one. I'll post a link right up here. So now I know I'm really one of the first people out actively flying the 915, at least in a STOL environment or in the bush environment kind of thing that we fly in all the time. Now, obviously, with my demands being a little different than a lot of maybe more cross-country cruiser type aircraft, I wanted to do a follow-up and let you guys know my more long-term thoughts on the 915. Is it worth it? How does it perform? Are there any downsides and all that? Now, for you guys that are impatient, spoiler alert, I freaking love this engine. It's amazing. It's got gobs of power. It can be totally efficient if you want to run it that way, but when you need to pour the coals to it, it just performs incredibly. Now, being that it is fuel injected, you don't have those cold or hot start issues. I'm never having any sort of vapor lock problems. And then one of the biggest things for me, for those of you that follow along, my house with an 800-foot airstrip's at 5,800 feet. Now, it's not uncommon to see 100-degree days in the summer, which puts the density altitude, depending on the pressure, around 8,500 to 9,000 feet. So when you're trying to take off at full gross in 800 feet, and mind you, my strip is a one-way in, one-way out, if I have a west wind, I'm gonna be taking off with a tailwind, and I would absolutely take off with a tailwind over taking off uphill into rising terrain, even if I have a headwind. So you gotta factor that. I've got this thing, I am pushing it on hot, high density altitude days, and that is where this engine actually shines. Now, comparing it directly to some of my Carbon Cub buddies, you know, they're running the Titan 340 that puts out 180 horse at sea level. I forget, we did the math once, but there's a point of altitude or certain altitude where the power or effective horsepower of the 915 actually passes the Titan 340. And I wanna say it's right at about 5,500 or 6,000 feet. And for me, what that means is up here where we live and breathe, I effectively make more horsepower than a Titan 340. Which is pretty impressive, and it's very noticeable when you're flying next to some of these Carbon Cubs. At sea level, I mean, a light Carbon Cub with a good pilot, they're still gonna smoke me off the ground. I'm not horrible, but it's really when you come up to higher altitude that you notice a difference. Like, I'll show you guys this video I have, sorry for the cell phone quality, but this was at, I think, 6,500 feet on a hot day. Density altitude was over 8,000 feet, had maybe 5 miles an hour on the nose. But watch how this thing just rips off the ground.
All right, we're at 8,100 foot density altitude with maybe a 3-knot headwind. Not bad.
And short of just having a lot of power, if you pull that throttle back just a bit, if I cruise at, say, Cub speed, which we're normally indicating, at least my friends, around 85 miles an hour. Again, that's indicated. At those speeds, I'm seeing sub 5 gallons an hour in fuel burn. And if I want to true out at 100 miles an hour, I think I'm just over 5.5. And if I want to pour all the coals to it and really get going, mind you, this plane is fairly draggy, I can get it to true out at about 120, 125 miles an hour. So from that sense, it's pretty awesome. Now there are some downsides to this engine, one of which, the main one, being weight. And just because of all the stuff that they've added to this engine over the base 912, it does add, I forget what it was. I know this entire assembly with the new firewall forward, the constant speed prop, the whole nine, I ended up adding 100 pounds to the nose of my airplane, which hurts. It's hard in the STOL environment, but you know, with that much extra horsepower, knowing that if I can get in somewhere, I can absolutely get out, that weight penalty to me is absolutely worth it. Now, the other potential downside would be cost. And a lot of people really like to hate on the 915 because it does cost, I think it's about $38,000 right now, US dollars, which is a lot of money. I mean, that's like a brand new car. So I understand where they're coming from, especially with the older mindset that Rotax isn't, you know, a true aviation motor, which is a totally ridiculous comment. The 912, which is an aviation-specific, horizontally opposed four-cylinder engine, came out in 1979. That's over 30 years old, so you can't tell me it's not tried and true. Just the new one, being that it has so much other technology, ended up being a lot heavier, but also that technology comes with a price. And like I've said, at first I was one of the haters. I did not like that. Why would they make an engine that expensive? But that was before I was really keen to all the technologies and all the safety features of this engine. Now, for reference, in comparison to something like the Titan 340 that comes in the Carbon Cub, the Titan is about $29,000. So to a lot of people, they're gonna say, well, for $29,000, I can have an engine that is 40 horsepower more, which is arguable. Now that's until you really factor the whole picture. Now a CC340 made by Titan is also, I believe, owned by Lycoming. It's essentially a Lycoming 320 that's ported and polished and bored out. Don't quote me on this, I just know a little bit about it, but I could miss some pieces. But overall, it's running technology from the 1930s. Air-cooled engine running a carburetor with a choke and the whole nine. It's a very basic low-tech engine. Now, their manufacturing technologies have come a long way, but the technology in the actual engine really has not. And that's when you start to look at things and compare with the 915 and you start seeing where all the cost comes from. For starters, everything in the engine, from the power system to the fuel management, is completely redundant. It's got dual alternators, one for the engine power, one that's separate for the ship power. If the engine one were to fail, it would pull from the ship power and limit your output to the ship, meaning that your lights might not work or you'd have some other issue. At this point, you're looking for somewhere to land. If both alternators were to fail, I mean, it's probably not a day to buy a lottery ticket, but you could still run off the battery for a while as it's still feeding the fuel pumps. It has dual fuel pumps, running into dual sets of fuel injectors. Each individual injector is capable of handling 150% of what that cylinder could burn at maximum full throttle, full everything. So even if you were running on a single set of injectors, you really wouldn't be stressing it at all. On top of that, to make so much power, obviously it is turbocharged. Turbo, when done in the wrong way, can add some issues, but Rotax has taken care of all of that because it's such a smart ECU-driven engine. And I don't know if I've mentioned this, it is a FADEC engine. Everything is ran through the two redundant computers internally. It's got dual ECUs. If one were to fail, it swaps over to the other. In the event that the turbo does create too much boost for the engine, the ECUs are gonna read that. They're gonna go ahead and open the electronic solenoid that's a vacuum-powered wastegate to allow air to come out so it doesn't overboost. But in addition to the wastegate, it's got a mechanical blow-off valve that is all pressure regulated, so again, it cannot overboost. Obviously though, with an engine like this, putting out that much more horsepower in a similar size to the 912 puts out a little bit more heat, so it does run an intercooler. It's always gauging intake air temps and adjusting not only the boost, but the map to the engine to ensure that it's not detonating. Now, speaking of detonation, there's also a knock sensor on the engine. In the event that it starts to pre-detonate, the engine's gonna pull that boost back, change the timing. All of it is mapped independently on its own. You don't have to do anything. It's like a car engine, just way more redundant. And also, while this engine does share the same displacement as the 912 ULS, which is their 100-horse engine, it's got a completely redesigned crankcase. Most of the engine throughout has minor modifications, and the biggest one being the gearbox. Now the standard gearbox on a Rotax 912 or 914 is a great gearbox. It's tried and true. It's just once you get up to about 120, 130 horsepower, you start stressing it beyond the limits that Rotax was comfortable with. So they redesigned the gearbox on this thing. It's running 2 different clutches internally, as well as a torsion shaft. What that means is it basically dampens all the harmonics that are coming between the prop and the engine to make it extra smooth. And another big thing, because of the clutches, it gives you prop strike protection. So for me, when I'm landing out next to rocks, I'll show you in a minute where I am here, you know, unforeseen things can happen. I've been lucky, I'm very diligent to look for that kind of stuff, but that said, things happen. If you end up going on your nose or hitting your prop, it's a lot nicer to just be replacing a prop than an entire crankshaft and an engine. So that could be the difference in a couple $1,000 repair and a $10,000+ repair for a crankshaft. So prop strike protection, man, that's a mouthful. That's a huge plus, at least for me. Now the other thing too, through that gear reduction, it's a 2.53 to 1 reduction, which means at full redline RPM of 5,800 engine RPM, the prop's only turning about 2,300, which is a very neighborhood friendly noise. I'm not hitting the sound barrier or coming anywhere close. And if you guys have ever heard this thing fly and take off, it almost is like a little bit underwhelming noise-wise, because you're hoping that that monster of an engine's gonna put out more noise, and it really doesn't. It's super quiet. But for me, who's gonna be flying from his house with neighbors around, it's a huge plus to have such a quiet airplane. You know, it's been years that people have been trying to run auto conversions and snowmobile engines and all sorts of different engines to put out a ton of horsepower in airplanes, and overwhelmingly, I mean, across the board, they flop. And it's for a good reason. It's very hard to make an engine that performs well in the application that we're flying in, especially when you're talking about gear reductions and all that. Rotax has been doing it for 30 years. They've got it figured out. So to me, I still am gonna stand by saying this, that I think the Rotax 915 is the best internal combustion engine there is. And as far as the price, I hear you guys, it's tough. You know, and if it wasn't for the support of my sponsors like the Rotax Flying Safety Club, I personally wouldn't have been able to afford this engine setup either. I've just been lucky enough through the support of a whole bunch of great companies to be able to be here and show off how awesome their products are. I really don't have any complaints. The one thing I guess was that service bulletin that you guys saw, but again, I will take a service bulletin and waiting on parts for a little bit versus some of the other options of engines out there now being automotive conversions and whatnot. And the way you'd find out about an issue like that is when your engine goes quiet and you experience a failure. So I'll take a service bulletin over that any day. Anyway, guys, I have rambled on for way too long. I owe you guys a couple videos. I owe a house update. It's coming very soon. We did finish the house back in September and moved in, so I need to show you guys the tour, give you the whole rundown and the follow-up on that. Gotta get back to flying as the weather starts to clear right now. I might go buzz around, but anyway, you guys know the drill. Like this video if you do, subscribe if you haven't. Come be my wingman. See you on the next one. Peace.